A Brief History of the 3rd Battalion, 1st Punjab Regiment. Chapter 1, Shoalingher Carnatic. December 10, 1776, Formation. Owing to a threatened invasion of the Carnatic by the Marathas, the growing power of Hyder Ali of Mysore, and war with the French, it was considered necessary to increase the troops of the Madras government. The native portion of the army then consisted of 8 battalions, and 8 more were raised, the present 3rd Battalion 1st Punjab Regiment being formed by drafts from the other battalions, and designated the 16th Carnatic Battalion or Lane's Battalion. Captain Thomas Lane was the first commandant, and Ensign James Richardson the first adjutant. The battalion remained at Trichinopoly where it was raised until 1778, when it joined the main army under Sir Hector Munro for the reduction of the French settlement of Pondicherry. This place was invested on August 8 and capitulated on October 17. The battalion's casualties were: killed 1 sergeant, 1 naik, 19 sepoys; wounded 1 lieutenant, 5 havildars, 2 naiks, 1 drummer, 26 sepoys, a total of 56. The 16th was one of the battalions left to garrison the town and to assist in dismantling the defences. 1780, Defence of Permacoil Fort. In September 1780, Hyder Ali, the Sultan of Mysore, invaded the Carnatic in alliance with the French. The battalion, less 1 company under Lieutenant Bishop at Permacoil Fort, joined the main army which marched to Conjeeveram, with the object of joining hands with a detachment under Colonel Bailey, which was marching from Guntur. Defeat of Colonel Bailey's detachment. This detachment was attacked by Hyder Ali within 8 miles of the main army. Sir Hector Munro sent a force, consisting of the flank companies of the army, to rescue Colonel Bailey, but the entire detachment was either killed or taken prisoner to Seringapatam. The army, thus reduced, was forced to retire to Madras, with the loss of baggage, being harassed the whole way by the Mysore cavalry. Sir Hector Munro was relieved of his command for not having supported Colonel Bailey with his whole army instead of with a detachment only. Sir Eyre Coote took over command and formed the army into 3 divisions, the battalion being placed in the 2nd, or left division under Colonel Lord MacLeod. 1781, Carnatic. Arrangements having been made for the supply of the army, it marched from the Mount on January 17, strength 7,450, including 1,600 Europeans, and 62 guns. Relief of Permacoil. The first object was the relief of various forts besieged by Hyder Ali, among them Permacoil, held by 1 company of the 16th. This was effected. Lieutenant Bishop was noted for immediate promotion for the gallant manner in which he had carried out the defence, but this was disallowed by the directors of the company as contrary to the established custom. Battle of Cuddalore. After several skirmishes, Hyder Ali made a general attack on the British while they were in camp near Cuddalore. This was repulsed, the 16th Battalion being cited in orders as having behaved especially well. Battle of Porto Novo. The army continued its march southwards, and found the united armies of Hyder Ali and the French, under Lally, in position near Porto Novo on July 1. The enemy numbered 60,000 regulars, with 47 guns and 120,000 irregulars. Coote attacked the enemy's left flank, which was broken, and caused the general defeat of the enemy. The 16th was in the 2nd line under General Stewart, which covered the left of the attack and finally repulsed the cavalry under Lally, which made a desperate final attempt to break the British line. The casualties were: killed European 19, native 64, wounded European 38, native 198, missing European 1, native 18, total 338. The battalion's losses were: killed 1 European drummer and 3 rank and file, wounded Ensign John Haynes, 2 subadars, 2 havildars and 20 rank and file, missing 1, total 30. Coote especially praised the steadiness and spirited behaviour of the Sepoy Corps. The victory could not be followed up owing to lack of cavalry and supplies, but it broke the spell and terror of Hyder's name. The army now moved north to effect a junction with the Bengal detachment, which was marching down the coast. This having been accomplished, the whole force returned to St. Thomas Mount on August 8 and was reorganised into 5 brigades. The 16th was placed in the 2nd Brigade, Colonel Ross Lang, right wing under Sir Hector Munro. On August 16 the whole army marched, and having taken Tripasore, continued its westerly advance. Battle of Pollilore. The whole strength of the enemy was found in position at Pollilore. on the same ground on which Bailey's detachment had been destroyed the previous year. The effective British strength was 11,000, and that of Hyder Ali and the French 150,000, regulars and irregulars, with 80 guns. Coote attacked and penetrated the enemy's centre with his right wing, while his left outflanked the enemy's right. A general retreat of the enemy then commenced. The British casualties were: killed Europeans 24, native 105, wounded European 54, native 207, missing native 63, total 453. Again, the lack of cavalry, supplies and transport prevented the victory being exploited, and the army fell back on Tripasor on August 29. Battle of Sholinghur. The fort at Vellore, which was besieged by the enemy, being in urgent need of relief, Coote, with great difficulty, collected sufficient transport and rations to march with this object on September 21. Hyder Ali was holding a pass through the Sholinghur hills on the direct road with his whole army. The British army arrived at the pass on September 27 and at once attacked. Hyder Ali did not realize that the British were seriously attacking. The 2nd Brigade and the cavalry were sent to turn the enemy's left flank while the rest of the army attacked frontally. The attack was entirely successful, and the enemy fled in disorder after the defeat of the Mysore cavalry. The strengths of the opposing armies were: British 11,500, Mysore 150,070 guns. The British casualties were only 20 killed, 58 wounded and 9 missing. Owing to the continual dissensions between the civil and military authorities, an efficient supply and transport service was impossible. Government also would not sanction the raising of cavalry. So for the 3rd time in this year decisive victory was missed. Coote V declared that he would rather have had 5 days' rice than the trophies and credit of the victory. In 1889, the battle honour Sholinghur was sanctioned for the battalion in commemoration of its services in this battle. Relief of Vellore. Vellore having been relieved on November 3, the army returned to Madras, where it arrived on December 3. Defence of Tripasor. Tripasor, the main base of the army, was attacked by Hyder, but held out until relieved, the garrison being under the command of Lieutenant Bishop of the battalion. 1782, relief of Vellore. Early in January it again became necessary to relieve Vellore, to effect which the army marched on the 2nd, and after some fighting, the place was relieved on the 11th. Hyder intercepted the return march, but on 2 occasions refused battle. Surrender of Permacoil. In May, the fort of Permacoil, held by a company of the battalion under Lieutenant Plaw, was forced to surrender. Relief of Wanduash and Battle of Arni. Owing to the continued lack of transport, the army was practically immobile, and Hyder Ali laid siege to Wanduash and other forts. To draw him off, Coote marched towards Arni, Hyder's principal depot. This had the desired effect, and the British were overtaken on June 2, about 3 miles from Arni. The rearguard held the enemy until the army was formed up, when the whole line advanced and drove the enemy back. The advance had to be stopped for a time owing to an attack by 11,000 cavalry on the baggage, which was covered by the 2nd Brigade. This being repulsed, the advance continued until the exhaustion of the infantry called a halt. There being no cavalry, the pursuit could not be continued. The army later fell back on Madras. Owing to ill health, Sir Eyre Coote handed over command to Brigadier General Stewart in September and returned to Bengal. Reinforcements of British troops having arrived from England, the army was reformed in January, the 16th being placed in the 3rd Brigade, 1st line. Hyder Ali died in this year and was succeeded by his son Tipu. Attack on Cuddalore. The army marched south on February 4 and came up with the united forces of Tipu and the French near Nedingal. The enemy refused battle, and the army marched to the relief of Vellore. This effected, it moved in a leisurely way to Cuddalore, where it arrived on June 7. Coote, who had returned to command, died on April 27, to the grief and consternation of the army, especially of the native portion. Cuddalore was attacked, but owing to the faulty timing of the 3 columns, the attacks were not simultaneous and were brought to a standstill. The British lost Europeans, killed 165, wounded 428. Natives, killed 60, wounded 292, of which the battalion sustained 6 killed and 36 wounded. The force on either side is supposed to have been 11,000. The situation was critical, especially as the fleet had been so badly damaged by the French under Suffren that it was forced to retire on Madras. Fortunately, at this juncture, news was received that peace had been declared on July 2. General Stewart was relieved of the command and was succeeded by Colonel Ross Lang. Capture of Palgacheri and Coimbatore. The battalion now formed part of a force which was sent south and captured Palgacheri and Coimbatore. It was then to advance on Seringapatam from the south. Everything was ready, but the orders were countermanded owing to a truce with Tipu. The army dispersed, but had no sooner done so than its 7 was ordered to reassemble owing to Tipu having refused to sign. This had the desired effect, but it was not till March 11, 1784, that peace was finally declared. In this year the designation of the battalion was changed to the 16th Madras Battalion. For services during the campaigns of 1780 for the battle honour Carnatic was granted to the battalion in 1889. Chapter 2 Mysore Seringapatam. Mysore Battle of Cheyur, surrender of a road. The battalion was employed on ordinary garrison duty until 1789, when it joined a force operating against some insurgent zamindars in southern India. At the end of the year, owing to an expected outbreak of war with Tipu, it formed part of the army assembling at Walajabad with the intention of entering Mysore from the south. Coimbatore and other places in this district were occupied, the battalion being with the 1st Native Brigade, which took the fort of Sachiamangalam, which it garrisoned. On September 11, Tipu suddenly descended the Guzalhudi Pass with 40,000 men. Information of this move had been received, but was disbelieved at headquarters, and the detachment was ordered to hold on. After holding off the attack of Tipu, it was decided to retire at daybreak on the 14th, but the detachment was overtaken, and a battle ensued at Cheyur, in which the brigade lost 148 Europeans and 408 natives killed and wounded. 6 guns and all the baggage were lost, but the enemy was checked. A road, which was held by a company of the battalion under a subadar, was forced to surrender on September 25. Tipu, hearing of a concentration at Vellore, marched north unobserved, and was not followed by the army until November 8. The battalion with the 1st Europeans, 14th and 20th Battalions, was left to hold the Coimbatore district with headquarters at Palgacheri. Siege and surrender of Coimbatore. The enemy sent a force which besieged Coimbatore in June. The siege was raised by a force consisting 9 of the battalion and some local levies, and a company was left to strengthen the garrison. In October the enemy again attacked Coimbatore, and an attempt to relieve the place having failed, it surrendered after a defence of a month. In December orders were received to clear the district. This was done, and by March 1792 the force had with great difficulty reached the head of the Guzalhudi Pass, but was ordered to retire as peace had been made. The battle honour Mysore was granted to the battalion in 1889 for services during the campaigns of 1790–92. War was declared against France in 1793, and volunteers from the battalion formed part of the 2nd Volunteer Battalion for the expedition against Mauritius, but this was abandoned. In 1790, war was declared against Holland, and 1 company embarked as part of a volunteer battalion which proceeded to Malacca. In 1796, the Madras Army was reorganised, the battalion becoming the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Regiment of Madras Native Infantry. The battalion embarked in 1797 for an expedition against Manila, but was recalled from Penang owing to instructions from England to abandon the expedition. Capture of Seringapatam. Tipu became restless, and in 1798 an army was ordered to concentrate at Vellore under General Harris. The battalion was in the 6th Brigade, left wing. The army advanced in February 1799, and after some minor actions encamped 2 miles southwest of Seringapatam on April 5. After much fighting against the enemy's advance posts, which were gradually captured, the breaching batteries were established by May 2. By May 4 a practicable breach had been made, and the 10 assault was ordered for 1 o'clock that afternoon. The battalion was on duty in the trenches on that day, the assaulting troops being formed of the flank companies of the battalions off duty. The troops in the trenches formed the sustaining corps. The assault was entirely successful after severe fighting. Tipu himself was killed. The casualties were Europeans, killed 181, wounded 622. Natives, killed 119, wounded 420, missing 100, of which total the battalion sustained 11 killed and 33 wounded. The battle honour of Seringapatam was subsequently granted to the battalion for this campaign. Chapter 3 Ava. During the next few years, the battalion was employed in settling the country and subduing refractory chiefs, and so did not take part in the Maratha War under Sir Arthur Wellesley. In 1824, its designation was changed to the 16th Regiment of Madras Native Infantry. Until March 1824, the battalion was on ordinary garrison duty in various parts of Mysore and the Nizam's dominions, when it embarked for service in Burma and joined the force assembling at Chittagong for the conquest of the province of Arakan. 1825, Ava, Battle of Arakan. The force marched in February 1825, and after great hardships arrived in front of the principal Burmese outpost at Mahati. A detachment of the battalion was employed on board the flotilla accompanying the force, and was present at the repulse at Chambala. The main force took the advanced Burmese positions on March 26th and 27th, and halted upon the enemy's main position, covering the town of Arakan on the 28th. On the 29th, the assault was carried out by the light companies of the 54th Foot, 10th and 16th Madras Native Infantry, supported by 6 companies of the battalion under Captain French. The assault went forward in spite of the steepness of the ascent, and the well-directed fire of the enemy. The leading men got their hands on the trench, but were unable to maintain their position owing to the incessant shower of large stones. Nevertheless, the attack was maintained until 12 Captain French had been killed, and every other officer wounded, when the troops were recalled. The force had lost 28 killed and 114 wounded, of which the regiment had Captain French and 10 other ranks killed and Lieutenants Luard, White, and Gledstanes, and 31 other ranks wounded. Batteries were constructed and at 11 p.1000, on the 30th an assault was carried out which was entirely successful, and the city was occupied the next day. A force consisting of the light companies of the 44th and 54th Foot, and of the 16th Madras Native Infantry, and 4 companies of the 1st Bengal Light Infantry Battalion, marched in May 1825 to endeavour to find a route across to the Irrawaddy River, by which the force at Arakan could join hands with the main army from Rangoon. After terrible hardships they were forced to return, nearly every man being sick. The unhealthiness of the country may be judged by the fact that on October 1, 1825, the battalion only had 108 men fit for duty and 644 sick. Between June 16, 1824, and January 31, 1826, the battalion lost by death 7 officers, 5 native officers, and 148 other ranks and 15 followers. Some battalions did not have a single man available for duty. The expedition had been successful in the conquest of the province of Arakan, but failed in its principal object, that of penetrating to the valley of the Irrawaddy. The troops were withdrawn later, the battalion landing in Madras in January 1826 and proceeding to Vellore. The Battle Honour Ava was granted for services in this campaign. In 1830, the 16th was one of the battalions selected to have a rifle company, on the disbandment of the Madras Rifle Corps. 1839, capture of Colonial, 1844, operations in the Sawant-Wari. From 1826 to 1839, the battalion was employed in 13 the ordinary routine of garrison duty in various parts of the Madras Presidency and Hyderabad state. In the latter year, it formed part of the force under Major General Wilson for the reduction of the fort and petty sovereignty of Colonel. This having been effected, the battalion was left to garrison the fortress until 1843, when it was ordered to Belgaum in the southern Maratha country, to replace the Bombay troops employed in the conquest of Sindh. While stationed there, the Rifle Company greatly distinguished itself in the light field force under Major General de Lamotte, employed in suppressing the insurgents in the Sawant-Wari country, and took part in the capture of several forts. Action of Sasidrug. Privates Kartapa and Virapa were awarded the 3rd class of the Order of Merit, which had just been instituted, for distinguished conduct at the unsuccessful attack on the stockade in the pass of Sasidrug. The former was also presented with a gold medal by the city of Perth for protecting and bringing off the body of Lieutenant Campbell of the Bombay European Light Infantry. Private Hyder Ali Khan was also admitted to the 3rd class Indian Order of Merit for distinguished gallantry, while Lieutenant Francis Mardell received the thanks of the Commander-in-Chief and Government of Bombay. The battalion was on garrison duty in various parts of the Bombay Presidency and southern India until 1853, when it proceeded to Aden, returning to India in 1855. Chapter 4 1857, Burma, 76th Punjabis. 1857, the Mutiny, Battle of Azamgarh. On the outbreak of the mutiny of the Bengal Army in 1857, the battalion volunteered for service against the mutineers and was thanked by the government. The rifle company under Lieutenants Bates and Gray formed part of the Madras Rifles, commanded by Major Carr of the 16th. The company took part in several actions, notably that at Azamgarh on April 6, 1858, up to the end of the mutiny. The company rejoined battalion headquarters at Harihar in April 1860. 7 non-commissioned officers and privates were admitted to the 3rd class of the Indian Order of Merit for distinguished conduct at Azamgarh. 1858, operations in North Kannada. In 1858, while the regiment was stationed at Mangalore, a detachment of it formed part of a force under Captain Walpole of the 16th for the suppression of an insurrection in North Kannada. After 10 months of very harassing duty, the rebellion was put down and the detachment rejoined the battalion at Harihar in January 1859. In 1865, while stationed at Madras, the reorganization of the army took place consequent on the transfer to the Crown of the forces of the East India Company. The battalion proceeded to Burma in 1866 and returned to India in 1868. Up to 1886, the battalion was employed on garrison duty in various parts of the Madras Presidency and of the central provinces. 1886, Burma. In July 1886, the battalion, which was then at Vizianagaram, was ordered to embark for active service in Burma and crossed the frontier on August 1. The 16th formed part of the 3rd Brigade, Upper Burma Field Force under Brigadier General Anderson, and was employed in various parts of Upper Burma, chiefly on detachment, and took part in much desultory fighting. During the campaign, the following casualties were incurred: 1 British officer killed and 1 wounded, 5 other ranks killed and 3 wounded. In 1887, 61 non-commissioned officers and men died of disease. Total deaths from this cause on service were 102. The Battle Honour of Burma, 1885-87, was granted for this campaign. In February 1888, the battalion went into garrison at Mandalay until March 1889, when it returned to India and was stationed at Secunderabad. 1903. The battalion again proceeded to Burma in 1895, being stationed at Rangoon until December 1898, when it returned to India and was stationed at Berhampur. There it remained until January 1900, when it embarked for Singapore, in relief of British troops who had been sent to South Africa. Returning to India in November 1901, the battalion was stationed at Madras until May 16, 1903, when it was transferred to Secunderabad to be reconstituted as a Punjab Regiment with the designation 76 Punjabis. Thus, after an honourable existence of more than 130 years, the battalion ceased to exist as a purely Madras battalion. The colours, mess plate and band instruments were handed over to the new battalion, and Lieutenant Colonel J. Jackson, of the old 16th, was appointed commandant. Drafts of about 200 non-commissioned officers and men were received from various 16 Punjab battalions, and the new battalion recruited up to full strength, the majority of the British officers being those of the 16th Madras Infantry. The new composition of the battalion was 2 companies of Sikhs, 2 companies of Hindu Jats, 4 companies of Punjabi Musalmans. The uniform remained scarlet, but the facings were changed to emerald green from yellow. In this year sanction was accorded for general officers, who had been previously connected with battalions of the Indian Army, being appointed honorary colonels thereof. Accordingly, Major General Henry S. Elton, who had formerly served for 32 years in the 16th Madras Infantry, was appointed the first honorary colonel. By the end of 1904, the battalion was reported fit for service. In March 1908, the battalion proceeded to Tientsin, North China, for garrison duty, finding detachments at Chinwangtao and Shanhaikwan. It returned to India in 1911 and was stationed at Jhelum. Chapter 5: The Great War. Egypt, Sheba, Carthage, Euphrates, Nasiriyeh, First Battle of Kut. Orders were received to mobilize, as for service in Europe on October 21, and the battalion mobilized to full strength plus 10%. In 72 hours, a draft of 120 men of the 87th Punjabis, under Captain S. 1000. H. Bailey, was sent to the battalion in place of its own reservists, who could not be called up in time. A depot was left in Jhelum under Captain E. Milford. The battalion embarked at Karachi on October 31st as part of the 30th Indian Infantry Brigade under Major General 100. J. Mellis 5-100, which comprised the 24th Punjabis, 126th Baluchistan Infantry, and 27th Gurkha Rifles. The brigade disembarked at Suez and took over the defence of the Little Bitter Lake Suez section of the Suez Canal, on which the battalion found various posts with headquarters at Suez. On the Turks' threatening attack, the whole battalion took up position on the canal banks. Beyond one or two very small actions and one reconnaissance by 2 companies into the desert, no fighting took place in this sector. On March 13th, the 28th Brigade relieved the 30th, which concentrated at Suez for embarkation. The brigade sailed from Suez on March 22nd, and great disappointment was felt that it was sailing southwards instead of northwards to France, as had been expected. On April 7th, the battalion arrived at Basra and went into camp at Makina, where the brigade was concentrating as part of the newly formed 12th Division. On April 12th, the brigade attempted to reinforce the garrison of Sheba by wading through mud and water across the inundated country between Zoba Gate and Old Basra, but, owing to the farther bank being strongly held by the enemy, was ordered to retire when halfway across. Several attempts to cross by Belém were made, but priority had to be given to urgently required ammunition and rations, so the battalion remained in bivouac at Zoba Gate. Detachments were provided to protect the Belém convoys and drive off hostile craft. After Sheba, the battalion returned to Makina camp, and a few days later embarked for Awaz, and joined the concentration of the 12th Division under Major General Gorange at Sabay on April 28. After very hot and waterless marches, the division arrived at Ilah on the Karkay River on May 7. The Turks were found to have retired, but it was necessary to punish the Bini Turuf tribe of Arabs. The river was found to be about 300 yards broad and the bridging material insufficient, so a flying bridge and canvas boats were improvised, and thanks greatly to the exertions of many swimmers of the 66th and 76th, all men, stores and animals were eventually landed on the far bank. Carthagena. On May 13th, a column, of which the battalion formed part, marched by night to the cover of some hills facing the Karkay River, on the far bank of which was the principal Bini Turuf village of Carthagena. The morning of the 14th was spent waiting for the advance of the 12th Brigade up the left bank, which did not arrive owing to the bad ground it had to move over. At 2 p.1000, the 76th and 27th Gurkha Rifles advanced 19 towards the river bank, coming under fire from the village and its fort. The river was found to be 280 yards broad and very swift, and as there was no means of crossing it, a retirement was ordered at 6 p.1000, which was closely followed up by the Arabs. Bivouac was formed about half a mile from the river. The battalion had had 11 men wounded during the afternoon. On the 15th, the 27th Gurkha Rifles and the 76th again advanced to the river, and on volunteers being called for to swim the river, a party did so, led by Subadar Major Ajab Khan, under heavy fire from the fort and opposite bank, supported by the covering fire of the battalion. This party succeeded in emptying the only serviceable boat to be found on the other bank, under the close fire of the fort, and swam it across. Major Perrin's double company then proceeded to ferry across in this boat, and the first party, under Subadar Major Ajab Khan and Jemadar Mehdi Khan, stormed the gate of the fort and forced their way in, driving the enemy into the buildings or out of the fort, where they were shot by another party that had arrived, under the command of Subadar Indar Singh, and had meanwhile surrounded the fort. Eventually all the enemy were smoked out of the buildings and killed or captured. 2 double companies bivouacked in the fort, and the rest of the 76th and the 27th Gurkha Rifles bivouacked on the right bank. For their gallantry on this occasion, 6 Indian Orders of Merit and 20 Indian Distinguished Service Medals were awarded to the Indian officers and men who took part. 1 sepoy was killed, 1 Indian officer, and 11 sepoys wounded during the day. The next morning the village was burnt, and 2 days later the battalion started on the return march to Ilah and Awaz, whence it proceeded by steamer to Basra. Second action of Kurna. On the 28th May, the machine gun section and 50 rifles embarked on a river steamer under Captain Lang, and took part in the second action of Kurna, returning to Basra after the capture of Amara, in charge of prisoners. The battalion proceeded to Kurna by steamer on June 10 to take part in the 12th Division's advance up the Euphrates for the capture of Nasiriyeh. During the stay in Kurna the heat was intense, The whole brigade was trained daily in boat drill and formations in case this form of warfare should be necessary. Owing to the insanitary conditions in the Basra bivouac and the heat and mosquitoes in the marshy ground at Kurna, 270 men went down with fever before the regiment left. On the 26th, the expedition started up the Euphrates in steamers and crossed the Hammer Lake, where it was held up by the obstruction of the entrance to the Hakika Channel. This was eventually blown up by the sappers and miners, assisted by swimmers from the battalion, and the steamers were hauled across by working parties amounting to as many as 600 at a time. Reconnaissances were made up the Gurma-Safa Channel, and the Turkish positions located holding the junction of the Gurma-Safa and Euphrates. The country was under water except for a narrow strip on either bank. On July 4th, a short advance was made by the battalion to a point known as Atti's House, whence a further reconnaissance was made, and outposts pushed forward under the fire of snipers. The attack was ordered for the 5th, as follows: the 76th to advance up the left bank, supported by the 24th Punjabis and 30th Mountain Battery in boats in the marsh on its right, 27th Gurkha Rifles and 14th Hampshire Regiment to advance up the right bank. Gurma Safa Suki's Shayuk. The advance began at 4A1000 through thick palm groves and undergrowth, and at once met with opposition which was driven back, until the 27th on the other bank were held up by a broad creek, which could not be crossed. The 76th continued their advance, now enfiladed by the enemy on the other bank, as well as being strongly opposed to their front, until they were held up by the enemy in position behind a strong wall extending from the river to the marsh. Here Lt. Colonel Smithett was severely wounded, and Captain Bailey and Lieutenant Graves were also wounded. In addition to other casualties, the whole machine gun section was killed or wounded, and the guns damaged. The 24th now moved up and outflanked the enemy through the marsh, causing him to retire, pursued by half the 76th and the remainder of the 24th, until he reached his final position across the Euphrates, where he surrendered. The remaining 4 companies of the battalion were employed in keeping down the fire from the right bank during the pursuit. The casualties of the 76th amounted to 2 Indian officers, Jemadars Nur Khan and Maluka, and 14 men killed, 3 British and 2 Indian officers, and 37 men wounded, being about 20%. Of the strength engaged, about 150 men having been left in charge of the battalion's boats, which did not come into action. On the 6th the force proceeded upriver and formed camp at Asani, about 3 miles below the Turkish main position covering Nasiriyeh. From here reconnaissances were made and outposts pushed forward, and continual sniping took place on both sides. The heat was intense, and all ranks were exposed day and night to the elements, and every sort of mosquito and biting insect, there being no tents or cover of any kind by day or night. On the night of July 13th-14th, an attack was ordered 22 to establish a forward position on the right bank. Accordingly, Major Ribart's double company, supported by a company of the 48th Pioneers, attacked and rushed Shakir, killing most of the garrison and occupying the village. At the same time, the remainder of the battalion occupied a grove called 16 Palms without opposition, except for snipers on the right bank, and the 48th Pioneers entrenched the position. Our losses at Shakir were 2nd Lieutenant Hathorn, Indian Army Reserve of officers, and 1 sepoy killed, 7 men wounded. Throughout the 14th the enemy retaliated with gun and rifle fire, but the forward positions were maintained. Subadar Neki Ram was wounded at Shakir during the morning, till the 23rd preparations were continued for the assault, enemy sniping being continuous. Nasiriyeh. The orders for the attack on July 24th were as follows: the 12th Brigade to assault the enemy position on the left bank after an intense bombardment, supported by part of the 18th Brigade. On the position being taken, they were to swing round and enfilade the enemy's position on the right bank behind the Medijina Creek, which would then be assaulted by the 30th Brigade, supported by 1 battalion of the 18th Brigade, and covered by the artillery. The 30th Brigade was to assault as follows: 14th Hampshire Regiment, only 150 strong, and 27th Gurkhas would advance from the 16 Palms, Shakir line, covered by the fire of the 24th Punjabis and massed machine guns. The 76th in support, to advance simultaneously 1,000 yards in rear of the Hampshire Regiment and 27th Gurkhas. At 5A1000 on the 24th, the artillery bombardment began on the left bank and continued for 3/4 of an hour, when the 12th Brigade assaulted, and after severe hand-to-hand fighting, carried the position. At 23:07 A1000, The 30th Brigade began their advance under shell and heavy rifle fire from the enemy trenches, the ground being absolutely devoid of cover. Casualties were heavy. A barge had meanwhile been jammed across the mouth of the Medicina Creek. This barge carried parties of sappers and miners and pioneers with bridging material and reserve ammunition. Work was started on 2-foot bridges over the creek within 200 yards of the enemy trenches. The artillery bombardment continued until the Hampshire Regiment and Gurkhas and 76th had worked their way up to the bank of the creek. The water was found to be only waist deep, the flow having been stopped by the barge. At about 10:10, a charge was initiated and the enemy's position entered. After some hand-to-hand fighting, the whole of the position was in our hands, the enemy streaming across the plain, pursued by our fire. The supporting battalion of the 18th Brigade now passed through and took up the pursuit, while the 30th Brigade reformed and followed closely after it. The enemy did not stand in his second position and was driven out of a third position on the bank of the river in the evening. The 30th Brigade bivouacked on his third position. The Turks left in our hands 17 guns, numerous rifles, quantities of ammunition and stores. The enemy losses were 700 killed, 740 wounded, and 200 wounded prisoners. The battalion lost Lieutenants Darrell and McElwain, and Subadar Major Ajab Khan wounded, 6 rank and file killed, and 55 wounded out of about 300 engaged, the 30th Brigade losing 200 out of a strength of 900. The total British casualties were 564. Nasiriyah was occupied on the 25th without further opposition. During these operations from June 26 to July 25, the battalion had lost British officers, 1 killed, 5 wounded, Indian officers, 2 killed, 4 wounded, rank and file, 21 killed and 123 wounded, sick, approximately 70. The following decorations 24 were subsequently awarded: Distinguished Service Order 1, Military Cross 1, Indian Order of Merit 7, Indian Distinguished Service Medal 19. The month of August was spent in bivouac at Nasiriyah resting, only a few outposts being found by the battalion. At the end of the month, the 30th Brigade, less the 14th Hampshire Regiment, was moved by water to Amara to join the 6th Division in their advance up the Tigris. Reinforcements were received at Amara, and Lt. Colonel Smithett rejoined and took command. First Battle of Kut. The 27th Gurkha Rifles and 76th then proceeded, partly by steamer and partly by march, to join the concentration of the 6th Division at Sanyat. The camp was shelled by the enemy on September 25, and our force advanced and occupied Chahela Mounds on the 26th with little opposition. The 27th and 76th were detailed to guard the left flank and shipping during the coming battle, and entrenched themselves in redoubts on the right bank. On the 28th the First Battle of Kut took place. The Turks were beaten back, and the 6th Division occupied Kut al-Amara. The battalion was left to guard the hospitals, and a few days later marched to Kut. During the month spent in Kut, drafts were received from the depot, and a company of Jats from the 99th Infantry, under Major Cotton, with 2nd Lieutenants Spowart and Rogers, Indian Army Reserve officers, brought the battalion up to full strength again. Chapter 6, Ctesiphon and the retirement to Kut. On November 8 the battalion marched with a column, and joined the 6th Division at El Kutuni on the 15th. Battle of Ctesiphon. The advance on Baghdad commenced on the 19th, by a move against the Turkish positions at Zor, but after an exhausting day, the enemy was found to have retired. The main body continued its march to Lach the next day, but the 27th and 76th were detailed to escort the shipping round the thickly wooded Baghala Bend, and did not arrive at Lach till the 21st. The same evening the whole force moved out to attack the enemy in his position at Ctesiphon. The plan for the attack was as follows: A1 Brigade, supported by the heavy artillery and ships, to attack with its left on the river the enemy position from High Wall to Water Redoubt. B 1.5 Brigades to attack 5P Redoubt, the left of the enemy's first line from the east. C1 Brigade to attack 5P from the northeast, these being supported by the Royal Field Artillery Brigade and the Howitzer Battery. D a flying column, consisting of the Cavalry Brigade, 2 armoured cars, machine gun battery and the 76th Punjabis, to attack the left rear of the enemy, and on his retreating to pursue him to Baghdad. The Turkish first line was about 6 miles in length, consisting of redoubts heavily wired and connected by fire trenches. His second line, 2 to 3 miles in rear, was not so thoroughly entrenched. The enemy numbered 18,040 guns, the British 13,032 land guns. The night advance commenced at 7 p.1000. On the 21st, column A moving direct on its objective, B, C, and the flying columns followed the old Narwin Canal, each column halting on arrival at its allotted position. The flying column reached its position at 3 a.1000. During the march, the battalion formed the advance guard. Army transport carts, sufficient for half the men to ride in, were provided, mainly in order to facilitate a swift pursuit on the enemy retreating. At daybreak, the guns with column A could be heard away to the southwest. A few enemy camel patrols were rounded up by our cavalry and armoured cars. Columns B and C soon after advanced and took 5 p. after fierce fighting. At 8, the flying column advanced, cavalry on the right, 76th on the left, supported by the machine gun battery and S battery Royal Horse Artillery. To quote the official History of the War in Mesopotamia, after advancing about 1,200 yards, the 76th came under heavy fire from enemy infantry in their front, and a hot fight ensued. The 76th, behaving with great gallantry, gained some ground, but the hostile force opposing them, evidently part of the 51st Division, was too strong, and about 10 a.1000. The further advance of the 76th was definitely checked, and they dug themselves in. They had suffered heavy casualties, including the loss of their 2 senior British officers. The cavalry now withdrew to ward off an Arab attack on the transport and rear of columns B and 100. The battalion had by this time lost severely, and any attempt to advance was at once stopped by enemy rifle and machine gun fire. Meantime, many gallant actions were performed by various men, in bringing up ammunition and distributing it, and bringing the wounded into the shelter of the shallow entrenchment that had been made. During this time, severe fighting was taking place in the enemy second line. At about 27 p.1000, the enemy counterattacked with 2 fresh divisions, whose presence was, up to that time, unknown, and columns B and C were finally ejected from the enemy's second position. The right of the battalion was now attacked by about 2 battalions, and the flank thrown back to meet the attack. The enemy advanced to within 400 or 500 yards, where he was stopped. As darkness fell, piquets were pushed forward and to the right flank, and the battalion commenced to concentrate and dig itself in. The enemy showed no signs of movement. At 7 p.1000, orders were received to rejoin the brigade at 5 p., and this was done, very slowly and with great difficulty owing to the very large number of wounded who had to be carried. On arrival at 5 p., the battalion bivouacked on the enemy's first-line trenches, and the night passed quietly. The following extract from the official history serves to show that the efforts made by all ranks on this memorable day were not without considerable effect. According to the Turkish account, the 5 infantry battalions of the 51st Division here had now all been absorbed into the firing line, which covered a front of about 4 miles. That they could make no further progress seems to have been due mainly to the stout fighting qualities of the 76th and the fine work of S Battery. November 23rd. The next day the battalion was employed collecting wounded, ammunition and equipment between the enemy's first and second lines, and in keeping off marauding Arabs. By 3 p.1000, it was evident that the enemy was advancing from the direction of Ctesiphon Arch. The battalion was on its way back to High Wall for a much-needed rest, when it was urgently recalled to reinforce the troops holding 5 p. It came under artillery and rifle fire on the way, and eventually took up a position in a converted Turkish communication trench, which it held all night. The Turks appeared to have lost 28 their direction, as large bodies were moving about in the vicinity all night, but no serious attack took place, any visible movement by them being at once stopped by our fire. A patrol under Havildar Neki carried out a daring reconnaissance during the night and brought in valuable information. November 24th. Bitter cold was experienced all night, officers and men being dressed in shirts and shorts only. 5 p. was held all the 24th under fire from guns and snipers, while the wounded were evacuated to the rear. About 4 p.1000, the 24th Punjabis and 27th Gurkhas sent up all their water mules to the battalion, which was highly appreciated as the men had had no food or water, except what they carried, since the night of the 21st. The final retirement to High Wall was covered by the 76th and the 76th Battery, and was completed by 6 p.1000. The losses of the battalion during the 3 days were very heavy, viz. Killed Major 150, Perrin 2nd Lieutenant Ghazni, Indian Army Reserve of Officers, Subadar Abdullah Khan, Jemadars Saida Khan and Umrao Singh 99th, and 42 rank and file. Wounded: Lt. Colonel A100. H. Smithett, 2nd Lieutenant Spowart, Indian Army Reserve of Officers, 99th. Subadars Sohan, Mehdi Khan and Chuni Ram, 99th. Jemadars Sher Singh and Jalal Khan and 225 rank and file. Missing 5, died of wounds 3, wounded and missing 2. Lt. Colonel Smithett, the Commandant, died of his wounds on the 25th, to the great regret of all ranks. The retirement to Kut. During the 25th, the wounded were evacuated to Laj, one double company picaying the road. In the afternoon, dense columns of the enemy were seen to be advancing, and the force retired under cover of darkness to Laj, where it halted till the 27th. On the 27th, at 4 p.1000, the arduous retirement commenced, Azizieh, 22 miles being reached at 8 a.1028th, the left 29 half battalion there covering the bridgehead. On the 30th, the 30th Brigade with the 16th Cavalry and Howitzer Battery was ordered to move rapidly on Kut, where the shipping was being held up by the enemy, and marched at 8 a.1000. At 4 p.1000, after covering 20 miles, camp was formed for the night. Al Tubal. At 6 a.1000, the brigade was ordered to march as fast as possible back to the division's camp at Al Tubal, which was being attacked, in order to render it assistance. On arrival, the battalion came under shrapnel fire, and on the division retiring, it took over the duties of rear guard and marched till 5 p.1000, halted for half an hour, and then continued the retirement to Monkey Village, which was reached at 12 a.1000 on the 2nd, having covered 30 miles. The march was resumed at 5 a.1000, only interfered with by Arab snipers, and bivouac within 3 miles of Kut was reached at 8 p.1000. All ranks being exhausted, having marched 70 miles since 8 a.1000. And been on the move for 48 hours without food. The cold was bitter and no food or blankets could be obtained till nearly midnight. During the retirement, 1 man was killed, 1 wounded and 1 missing. The strength of the battalion on arrival in Kut under the command of Major Cotton, 99th Infantry attached was officers, British 8, Indian 13, rank and file 320. Of this retirement the official history relates, for over 12 days General Townshend's force, largely composed of young soldiers, had been fighting, marching or working continuously, frequently without sufficient food or water and often deprived of sleep. This 44 miles march General Mellis column did 51 miles, coming, under pressure from the enemy at the end of this period, and carried out in 36 hours, was therefore a severe test of 30 discipline. Their soldierly execution of it must arouse our admiration and add greatly to the reputation they had already won. The following decorations were subsequently awarded for these operations: Distinguished Service Order 1, Indian Order of Merit 1, Indian Distinguished Service Medal 2. Many very deserving rewards could not be granted owing to the loss of the recommendations during the siege. Chapter 7, Kut. The Siege of Kut. On the 3rd the force moved into Kut al-Amara. Some sick and lightly wounded men rejoined, bringing the strength up to about 333. The 30th Brigade was detailed as reserve brigade and was allotted camping space in gardens on the edge of the town. Work was at once commenced on the defences and pushed on with the greatest vigour possible. The battalion was employed night and day digging the second line and communication trenches to the front line. On December 5th, the enemy began to close round Kut and opened with artillery fire and a few snipers. The cavalry brigade and greater portion of land transport crossed the river on their way to Ali Garbai on the 6th, on which day the last steamer also left, and Kut was isolated. Work was continued on the defences to the limit of the men's endurance. The enemy strength increased daily, and he gradually closed in on the front line. Intense artillery bombardment was kept up for about 2 hours morning and evening when the mirage disappeared and enabled observation of fire to be made. On the 9th the enemy attacked the bridgehead on the right bank and captured it. Under cover of fire from the left bank, it was temporarily reoccupied, but again captured by the Turks. After dark the bridge was cut adrift, the right bank having been occupied in force by the enemy. The Turkish artillery fire had become so severe by the 10th that orders were issued to discontinue working in the open in daylight. The usual routine for the reserve brigade was to move out at dusk, work till 1 a.1000, when the units went into close reserve and support to the front line till dawn. They then returned to bivouac dugouts on the outskirts of the town. After food, work was again commenced on communications, improving roads, second-line trenches, etc. returned to bivouac for the evening meal preparatory to moving out again at dusk. Piquets along the riverbank, to prevent entry or egress of enemy agents, were also found in turn by night and day by the reserve brigade. On the afternoon of the 12th, the Turks made a determined attack on the northwest sector and succeeded in establishing themselves within 100 yards of the front-line trenches, although they failed to enter them. The same night the 76th moved up in relief to the front line. This relief of the 16th Brigade by the 30th Brigade, and vice versa, took place weekly after this date. The front line taken over was only of an average of 2.5 feet deep, with no sanitary arrangements, many dead being just thrown on the parapet or parados, and no direct communication trenches. The enemy was extremely active, pushing up his saps and opening new parallels. At night he was particularly active, making many attempts on the wire. These were all driven off by rifle and machine gun fire and by bombs, while his working parties were harassed by fire whenever possible. Our men were kept employed to the utmost limit of their strength, improving the trenches, etc. During this first tour of duty in the front line, the battalion lost severely, 2nd Lieutenant Muirhead being mortally wounded, Jemadar Ram Sarup killed, Subadar Sundar Singh wounded, and about 50 men killed and wounded. Throughout, the siege casualties were of daily occurrence, there being no place within the defences which was not under rifle fire. The majority of the 33 enemy artillery fire was directed at our artillery positions near the brick kilns, and on the town itself. The front line received very little artillery fire, and it was generally less strenuous in the front line than in reserve, the latter entailing constant working parties day and night, as well as having to be in close support on completion of the night's work. The men only had the clothes in which they stood up and 2 blankets, and consequently soon became lousy, as there was practically no opportunity of washing, all water having to be drawn from the river, which was some distance away and subject to heavy sniping. On December 24th, the enemy made a determined attack on the fort, which he entered, and was only ejected after severe hand-to-hand fighting at 3A1000 on the 25th. That evening the 76th, which was due for relief, received orders to move into the fort during the night, where it took over the north and west faces and repaired and improved the defences. It was again relieved on the 28th and had 24's much-needed rest. January 1916. Rain commenced falling on January 6th and added much to the difficulty of keeping the trenches and communications in good order and to the discomfort of the men. News of the relieving force was now received daily and gave all ranks a feeling of optimism as to the early raising of the siege. On January 21st the river overflowed into the enemy trenches, which in turn overflowed into ours, and no amount of work could stop it. A retirement was therefore ordered to the middle line, which had been prepared for occupation in such an eventuality, but was already 2 or 3 feet deep in mud and water. Ammunition, stores and kits were moved with great difficulty owing to the depth of mud and water in the front line and communication trenches, which was almost up to the men's necks. One havildar was drowned trying to rescue ammunition. The cold was also extreme, and the men, having no means of drying their clothes, 34 suffered heavily from exposure, 3 British officers and 50 men having to report sick. The enemy to our front had been forced by the water to retire 1,500 yards, and valuable firewood was retrieved from his trenches by parties from the battalion, after inflicting many casualties on him as he retired across the open. On the 29th horsemeat was first issued, and all rations were much reduced. February. On February 16th, a bund 20 feet thick was commenced all along the trenches in order to keep out the floods that were expected in March, and work on this continued nightly until it was finished. Enemy aeroplanes also put in frequent appearances, but in only one case did their bombs cause any damage. Several schemes for sorties were prepared, and the battalion actually paraded for some, but they did not eventually take place. Great difficulty was met with in getting the men to eat horsemeat, and they did not do so until very near the end of the siege. They did, however, find many kinds of edible weeds and grass to cook and supplement the scanty ration. The casualties in cut up to the end of February totaled 3,000. March. On March 8th and 9th, the battalion with others was held in readiness to cross the river and co-operate with the relief force, and great was the disappointment when its failure was made known. On the 10th rations were reduced to 10 ounces of barley and 4 ounces for parching, and all surplus animals were killed. On the 15th the enemy was again flooded out of his trenches. For some time past, the whole British garrison had been employed daily in making bricks and collecting materials, and nightly in completing the flood bund. The flood arrived on the 16th and continued rising, until on the 27th Cut was an island. On the 28th, rations were reduced to 8 ounces, and the same day a 35 new problem appeared in the percolation of water through the ground into the trenches from the flood outside. This gave serious anxiety and much hard work to counteract, nearly to the end of the siege. The men now began to become very weak and emaciated, but retained their spirits, in which all were much helped by the constant and distinctly heard bombardments of the enemy trenches by the relieving force, whose flashes and bursts could be easily seen at night. Casualties of the 76th from the commencement of the siege to the end of March. Officers. British died of wounds 1, wounded 2. Indian killed 1, wounded 4. Rank and file killed 32, died of wounds 17, wounded 90. Missing 2, died of disease 16. Followers killed 2, died of wounds 1, wounded 3. Total 171. On April 9th, rations were reduced to 7 ounces, on the 10th to 5 ounces, and on the 11th to 4 ounces, when the men at last overcame their prejudices and commenced eating horsemeat. Our aeroplanes were now dropping supplies daily, but were unable to carry sufficient to feed the garrison. On the 24th, the gallant attempt of the Julner was made to run up river with supplies, and great was the disappointment to see her ashore at Magassi's the next morning. Surrender now appeared inevitable. The reserve ration had been eaten and men were actually dying of starvation. Sentries could no longer stand at their posts but sat down, and for about 3 weeks the battalions in the trenches had not been relieved as the men were too weak to move their equipment, bedding and stores. It was indeed a pitiful sight to see the men weak and emaciated, but one was proud that the men of the battalion kept up their morale and did their utmost to carry out any order given. Owing to weakness, everyone lay flat on his back 36 whenever possible in order to conserve his strength, and the line sick were practically unable to move. On April 28th and 29th, the last emergency ration was consumed, and on the 29th the garrison surrendered after a defence of 150 days. Thus ended the siege of Cut, which had lasted for 5 months, a period of hardship and discomfort seldom equalled in the history of the British Army. The spirit, power of endurance and courage of the men of the battalion, in the face of never-ending digging and repairing of trenches, long hours of night duty, exposure to wet and bitter cold and starvation, is a wonderful proof of their soldierly qualities and a fine example to those who will follow them in the battalion. The fact that the siege had ended in capitulation was no fault of theirs, and by holding on to Cut, they had prevented the Turkish army from overrunning lower Mesopotamia. The battalion proceeded by steamer to the Turkish camp at Shumran, where it bivouacked on the bank of the river. The men were in the last stage of exhaustion, and more than 50% were suffering from an acute form of diarrhea. Very little food was obtained in this camp, and almost entirely consisted of hard Turkish emergency biscuits. Many men of the garrison died of starvation or enteritis. 23 men of the battalion were passed as unfit to march by the Turkish doctors. The rest marched off for Baghdad on the 6th with the remainder of the Indian garrison. The story of their hardships and suffering has been related elsewhere. The following went into captivity and remained prisoners, with the exception of a few who escaped, for 2.5 years. Major N5, 50, Ribot 500, SO. Captain E. Milford. Captain S. Van B. Laying 1,100, Captain and Adjutant G5, R. Rain. Second Lieutenant O. G. Kiernander, 1, ARO. Second Lieutenant G. N. Rogers, 1, AR. Captain F. T. Drake Brockman, 7th Lancers at. Captain P. B. Barucha 500, SO 1000, S was subsequently exchanged. And about 240 Indian officers, non-commissioned officers and men. Although the battalion had only been actively engaged since April 12, 1915, and had had several short periods of rest, the casualties from enemy action and sickness, mostly fever, during the 7 months to November 5, 1915, had necessitated the provision and absorption of drafts totaling 1,600 men, or nearly twice the original strength of the battalion. For services during the siege, 2 Distinguished Service Orders and 9 Indian Distinguished Service Medals were subsequently awarded to officers and men of the regiment. Chapter 8, End of the Great War, Third Afghan War. During the siege, large drafts for the battalion had collected with the relieving force, including Lt. Colonel Rodney Anderson, who had been appointed commandant, Lieutenants R. 500, E. Darrell, E.J. 500, McElwain A.H. Darbs T-1000, Graves, 2nd Lieutenants Lechler and Mahoney, Indian Army Reserve of Officers. The first named died in hospital, and Lieutenants Darbs and Graves were killed in action with the relieving force. The men were all attached to the 82nd Punjabis, now 5th Battalion 1st Punjab Regiment, and the 92nd Punjabis throughout the operations of the relieving force. On January 1, 1917, the depot of the battalion received orders to expand to a battalion and reform the 76th, the drafts in Mesopotamia being returned to assist in the making up of numbers. Lt. Colonel W. 50. Malcolm, from the 31st Punjabis, was appointed to command in March, and the regiment moved to Chaman for garrison duty there. In November, a nucleus was sent to join the new 2nd Battalion of the regiment, which was being raised at Nasirabad. This battalion eventually did good service on the frontier in 1919-20 in the Waziristan and Masud campaigns, being mentioned in dispatches. Several officers of the 76th served in it, and it was demobilized in September 1922, some of the officers and men rejoining the 1st Battalion. Lt. Colonel 50. A. Watson from the 74th Punjabis took over command on February 1, 1918, and in the same month the battalion moved to Dera Ismail 39 Khan and thence to Tank, leaving a depot at the former place. In June Major J. F. Woodham returned from service and took command. The regiment remained at Dera Ismail Khan and Tank, from time to time holding the outposts. While at Tank 2/3 of the regiment were at one time in hospital with Spanish influenza, of which 64 died. In December 1918 and January 1919, the released cut prisoners of war rejoined and were at once sent off to their homes on furlough. The numbers that rejoined were 8 Indian officers, 183 non-commissioned officers and men, and 17 followers. The following battle honours were granted to the regiment for the Great War: Suez Canal, Egypt 1915, Sheba, Kut al-Amara 1915, Ctesiphon, Defence of Kut al-Amara, Mesopotamia 1915-18, and the undermentioned decorations were granted to officers and men of the 76th. Commander of the Order of the British Empire 1, Distinguished Service Order 5, Order of the British Empire 2, Military Cross 1, Order of British India, 1st Class 1, Order of British India, 2nd Class 5, Indian Order of Merit, 2nd Class 14, Indian Distinguished Service Medal 53, Foreign Orders 4, Meritorious Service Medal 9, Mentions in Dispatches 101, and 4 Indian officers were given honorary King's Commissions. On war being declared on Afghanistan, the Battalion 40 was in Dera Ismail Khan with a company at Jandola, 3 platoons in other outposts, and 1 at Tank. A large draft was received from the 87th Punjabis. Various detachments were sent out to reinforce threatened points from time to time. Siege of Jandola. During May, as many of the Waziristan militia deserted and the tribesmen had risen, it became imperative to evacuate many of the posts held by the militia, and the result was that the company under Captain Anderson and Lieutenant Proctor in Jandola became isolated and surrounded by large numbers of hostile tribesmen. Owing to the forethought and energy of the commander, the reserve water tanks in the fort had been filled, providing water for 12 days, and there were 26 days' rations available. The water supply was cut off by the tribesmen on May 28, on which day the siege of Jandola commenced. On the 29th, the enemy opened fire on the main fort and pushed in an attack on a detached tower held by a party under Havildar Bari Shah, by whom he was driven off. That night the fort was attacked, as also was the detached tower, no less than 3 times, but all attacks were repulsed. Communication was interrupted the next day except by means of friendly batanis. Heavy attacks were again made during the night May 31, June 1. The men now suffered greatly from thirst, as water was strictly rationed to 2 water bottles a day, and the heat was very great. Many attempts were made to obtain water, but the enemy had all sources of supply accurately covered by fire. Bisti Gurdit Singh, with great gallantry and although wounded, several times succeeded in bringing in water under fire, for which he was later awarded the Indian Order of Merit. Continual sniping took place day and night, and several further attacks took place, but were in each case driven off with loss. On June 9 the movable 41 column arrived and raised the siege, and the garrison were relieved and rejoined the battalion. The casualties were Indian other ranks, 1 died of wounds and 1 wounded, and 1 follower wounded. Captain Anderson was awarded the Military Cross for the able manner in which he had defended the post. 2 Indian Orders of Merit and 2 Indian Distinguished Service Medals were awarded to men of the regiment, and 7 officers and men were mentioned in dispatches for services in the Afghan campaign. The complete battalion concentrated in Tank in July and remained there till the end of August, finding escorts for convoys and dealing with raiders. In September it moved to Kirgi, where a month was spent working on defences and roads, attempting to round up Mossad raiders and day-picaying. Several men died of cholera. By October 3rd, the battalion had concentrated at Darya Khan. The men left for their homes on furlough preparatory to proceeding to Palestine, and headquarters was dispatched by rail to Dihand. For its services on the frontier, the battalion was granted the Battle Honour, Afghanistan 1919, and General Service Medal, India 1908 with clasps, Afghanistan Northwest Frontier 1919, and Waziristan 1919-21. Chapter 9, Palestine 3rd BN, 1st Punjab Regiment, Waziristan. The battalion sailed for Egypt at the end of February under the command of Major S. Van B. Lang, 500. SO 1000, 100, and arrived at Sarafand in Palestine on March 24, 1920, where it joined the 9th Brigade of the 3rd Lahore Division. The depot was left at Dihand, but subsequently moved to Kirki, Bellary and Jhelum before rejoining the battalion at Lucknow in 1922. On April 28, 1920, the battalion proceeded to Haifa, whence, owing to constant raiding by Arabs from across the Jordan, it dispatched detachments to various places for their protection. A company was also sent to Cairo to be trained as a mounted camel company. A party of Musalmans was also enabled to perform the pilgrimage to Mecca. On July 27 the battalion proceeded to Jerusalem, whence about half the strength proceeded on detachment to various towns. The battalion arrived at Beni Suef in Egypt in December and took part in maneuvers near Cairo in March. In April the Camel Company, which had been employed on patrol work between Beersheba and the Dead Sea, rejoined, and in May the whole battalion arrived in Alexandria and provided detachments in and around that city. The salutary sea air quickly dispelled the many cases of malaria, which were a legacy from the Jordan Valley. In December 1921, the Commandant, Lieutenant Colonel E. Milford 500, SO rejoined from leave, and the 43 Battalion proceeded to Kantara to await orders to embark for India. Owing, however, to serious disturbances in Cairo, the battalion was hurriedly dispatched thither on Christmas Eve, and remained there till March 23. It then moved to Suez and embarked for India, arriving at Lucknow on April 7, where it was joined by the depot. 31st Punjab Regiment. In accordance with the reorganisation scheme, the Jat Company was now replaced by Rajputs from Rajputana, and on December 1 the battalion became the 3rd Battalion of the 1st Punjab Regiment, the other battalions being 1st 62nd Punjabis, 2nd 66th Punjabis, 4th 1st Brahmins, 5th 82nd Punjabis, 10th 84th Punjabis, who became the training battalion for the group or regiment. The badges of the elephant subscribed to say, and the golden dragon wearing an imperial crown, worn by certain of the battalions, were taken into use by all battalions of the new regiment. The uniform remained scarlet, but the facings were changed to grass green. The following officers were posted permanently to the battalion on reorganisation: Lieutenant Colonel E. Milford 500, SO, Major A. F. Harper, Major S. Van B. Lang 500, SO 1000, 100, Major T. B. Minakan rejoined from 276th, Major G. Van R. Rain 500, SO 1000, 50 rejoined from 276th, Major G. F. Turner 1000, 100 from 82nd, Captain E. J. 500, McElwain OBE, Captain 100, 100, J. Kelly from 1st Brahmins, Captain A. G. Lester Garland 1000, 100, 44, Captain S. F. Irwin, Captain W. A. Whitehead, Captain J. B. Dallison from 276th, Captain H. T. Davison from 276th, Captain 1000, J. Murray from 276th, Captain 100, G. Salai from 276th, Lieutenant E. J. Austin, Lieutenant H. W. Murphy, Lieutenant A. W. Lowther, Lieutenant G. E. Atwell. Seconded. During the hot weather, the battalion was honoured by being selected to provide the similar detachment to find the guards on the residences of His Excellency the Viceroy and His Excellency the Commander-in-Chief, under the command of Major S. Van B. Lang, 500, SO 1100. On November 21st, the battalion left Lucknow and proceeded to Waziristan, arriving at Razani on November 30th. Here it remained for 6 months, being employed in finding permanent PKs and road protection parties. It then proceeded to join the 7th Brigade at Razmak, and on arrival marched with the movable column to Sarakai and back. This demonstration march occupied 14 days, and a certain amount of sniping was experienced, Subadar Surat Singh and 10 other ranks being wounded. In August, the battalion proceeded to Toda, China for a month, where it provided protection and also working parties in connection with the completion of the circular road. 2 men were wounded during this period. In November, the battalion moved with a column to Piazza Ragza, where it remained for 6 months performing protective duties in connection with the improvement of the road and convoys, and providing about 1 company in permanent pickets. During the battalion's tour of duty in Waziristan, 2 men were killed, 1 Indian officer and 13 men wounded by enemy action. In December 1925, the battalion, under the command of Lt. Colonel A. F. Harper, moved to Nowshera in the northwest frontier province, where it formed part of the 4th Brigade. Thus, in the 150th year of its existence, the battalion is serving in Nowshera. Its services in Waziristan have been rewarded by the grant of the General Service Medal, India, with a clasp for Waziristan, 1921-24, and it has also been honoured by again being selected to find the detachment at Simla during the hot months.